is having two consoles launch really that bad? Most of the complaints of the Series S seem to be due to the lack of memory. Would everything be all right if the memory amount was the same between the Series S and the X? So, Alex, this is the reason I picked this question is that a couple of weeks ago you posited a theory that the next generation PlayStation would be potentially using a Series S/X type model. And then, lo and behold, there was a rumor that circulated directly afterwards saying that
I thought that was
Sony is developing multiple SoCs, or at least two. A thought that I had is that possibly, it could be an S and X style scenario. Another thought I had, possibly a bit more plausible, is that they're going to follow a route of a handheld and a home console. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about scalability between two different SKUs here, because I don't think the 4 teraflop GPU of the Series S is that much of a problem. But I do think the memory differential between the S and the X, and we've talked about this at length many, many times in the past. I think the memory interface and the savage cutback in memory on the Series S probably is more of a problem. What do you think?
I agree with that. I agree with that for a variety of reasons. One, Series S seems to be time and time again, other than a number of UE5 titles, to be the thing that doesn't allow the developer to push ray tracing on the Series S. We've seen a number of cases where it's just outright disabled, even for UE5 titles, by the way. And I feel like that prevents developers from making that the baseline requirement of their game and not requiring 2 art passes for the same content. And that is primarily down to the fact that ray tracing requires more memory, and ray tracing, which is why the 5090 is going to be incredible, it requires a lot of memory bandwidth. 5090 is probably going to be ridiculous. But yeah, I think that is like the huge differentiating factor there. There's also a couple of occasional other things that we've seen, like with regards to Baldur's Gate, where it seems like memory gets in the way of core game systems to a degree, because there's no reason why you can't just run each screen at 240p, right? Like, that's just the compromise. But if they have trouble getting it working in the first place, means that they're having trouble replotting out the memory and using it for game critical systems. And I think that's a big issue. I really do wish the Series S, all these years after the fact, did launch with more memory, so that it would be more, so that it wouldn't become like a pain process for developers. It would have been great if it was just, we'll have the game run at 540p. That would have been amazing, actually. The porting process would have been just so much smoother, instead of having developers complain to us behind the scenes about the Series S, right?
Or sometimes in public as well.
Or in public as well, too. Yeah.
Oliver, what do you think about this concept of memory parity? It's maybe overkill, but, there does seem to be issues there on that 2-console model.
Yeah, I think you could probably get a lot closer to what you'd want if the Series S had, say, 12 gigs or 14 gigs. Mm-hmm. When you get up those higher, if you're addressing a low resolution display, and you can probably decrease like the quality of certain assets, but not change those assets categorically, I think you could probably get a lot further on a little bit less memory. I think that's plausible. But I think there's probably also just a constraint when it comes to certain games of basically getting good enough scaling independent of RAM. Like when you look at UE5, like Alex mentioned, for Series S, it's often not scaling that well to Series S, even though RAM is less of a concern there. It's just like you look at a game like Brothers or Models of Avium, titles like that, often 60 FPS modes in different games, including Unreal Engine 5 games, but also some non-Unreal Engine 5 games like what we saw with Starfield on Series S there, where it's like very low resolutions, I think like 432p-ish for 60 FPS, FSR scaled to 1080p. Those are just pretty questionable looking images in the end. And it's not so much that the Series S is like too weak in an absolute sense. It's that these games are being developed for higher end console platforms primarily, probably with the PS5 as the lead platform. and then they're being scaled to Series S in a way that's not very flattering to that core visual design, where we wouldn't see that compromise as much if Series S was, like, say, the only console platform this generation. So I think there's a bit of a mix there in terms of the various causes of Series S faults in terms of that memory and also that compute bandwidth disadvantage as well.
I still think we need to do that 1080p video that you actually pitched, Oliver, which is to say, what is the difference between a base and a premium console when you've got a 1080p screen? I actually think, by and large, that there have been outliers, there have been concerns, there have been issues. I still think the Series S is delivering a huge amount for its price point. It does have the same CPU, it does have the same storage system, does have the same RDNA features. Everything about it seemed kind of right to me. Even the form factor. I mean, it was the only one of the consoles that actually looked like a console to me when I first saw them. It's just the memory situation. We kind of highlighted right at launch that this could be problematic because, memory is so important to the longevity of a device. And I think that's basically what they've got to address going forward. I mean, it looks like the Switch 2 is going to launch with more memory than the Series S. And I think that's probably the right move. 12 gigs versus 16 on the premium would probably have solved a lot of the problems there. I think the problem is when you make the determinations on specifications, you're doing so years before the devices are actually going to be coming out. And you're also doing so years before you actually have any idea of how those devices are going to be used. So, we've heard from some developers now that, Unreal Engine 5 really is a lot more, memory is a lot more critical than, say, GPU performance in terms of scalability. So I think that was probably where things started to go wrong there. Is this going to continue going forward? I just think what's probably going to happen on the Microsoft side, at least, is that there will be a greater move towards just embracing the PC ecosystem where hopefully you would be able to upgrade your way past these issues. Even in a potential Xbox that's a PC, I hope that would be actually thinking about it. If they're using the SoC model, that might be problematic. But, at some point, I do think that the console as it is probably not going to happen beyond Gen 10. So it would be PC all the way then. But yeah, I think that lack of memory probably was the main problem. Having said that, Series S, I still think it's doing some great stuff for its price point. And I really would be interested to see that 1080p comparison. Because, as you pointed out earlier, Alex, I do think that there's probably a ton of people that are still on 1080p anyway.